The stagecoach rattled to an abrupt halt, sending Theodora Glover lurching forward, her gloved hands grasping desperately at the worn leather seat to steady herself. Outside the window, a desolate, dusty street stretched before her, nothing like the thriving mining town she had been promised in those carefully penned letters. This was not Silver Creek, Wyoming territory. This was not where her intended waited. "Madam," the driver called down, his weathered face appearing at the window. "Welcome to Juniper Springs, last stop before we turn back east." "There must be some mistake," Theodora protested, gathering her skirts as she exited the coach. Her trunk hit the dirt with a thud, sending a small cloud of dust billowing around her polished boots. "I'm meant for Silver Creek. That's where Mr. Hargrove is expecting me," the driver tugged at his hat. "Silver Creek's another 50 miles west, madam. Next coach ain't due for 2 weeks." Theodora felt the blood drain from her face as the stagecoach pulled away, leaving her standing alone before a weathered building marked General Store in faded letters. June 1875 was proving to be even more challenging than she had anticipated when she'd left Boston behind. "Madam, you look like you could use some assistance." The deep voice came from behind her, and Theodora turned to find a tall man astride a chestnut stallion. The setting sun silhouetted his broad shoulders and the distinct shape of a cowboy hat. As he dismounted, she noticed his movements were fluid despite his imposing frame. "I'm afraid I've been left at the wrong town," she explained, trying to maintain her composure. "I'm a mail-order bride meant for Silver Creek." The stranger's face came into view as he stepped closer, strong jaw shadowed with stubble, piercing blue eyes that assessed her with unexpected gentleness. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the temples. "Name's Thomas Vance," he said, extending a calloused hand. "And if you don't mind my saying so, madam, I think fate's dealt us both a fortunate hand today," Theodora frowned. "I don't understand." Thomas Vance smiled, and something in that smile sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "You see, Miss Glover, Theodora Glover." "Miss Glover, I believe you're exactly where you're meant to be." He gestured to the modest town around them. "She's meant for me," he added, addressing no one in particular, as if declaring it to the dusty Wyoming sky. Theodora felt her cheeks warm despite her confusion. "Sir, I am promised to Mr. Hargrove in Silver Creek. There are contracts can be broken," Thomas said simply. "And I suspect Mr. Hargrove isn't half the man you deserve." "You're rather presumptuous for someone I've just met," Theodora replied, though she couldn't help but notice how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Not presumptuous, Miss Glover. Just a man who recognizes providence when it drops right in front of him." He picked up her trunk with ease. "Now, how about we get you settled at Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house? She makes the best apple pie west of the Mississippi, and you look like you could use a good meal after your journey." Theodora hesitated. 23 years of proper Boston upbringing told her to refuse this stranger's help, to maintain propriety, to find a way to continue to Silver Creek. But something about Thomas Vance's straightforward manner and the genuine warmth in his eyes made her reconsider. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Vance, but I must find a way to reach my intended." 2 weeks is a long time to wait in a town with no proper accommodations for a lady," Thomas countered. "At least let me help you get situated while you consider your options." Pragmatism won out over propriety. "Very well," she conceded, "but I want to be clear that I intend to honor my agreement with Mr. Hargrove." Thomas nodded, though his smile never dimmed. "Of course, Miss Glover, but Juniper Springs has a way of growing on people." As they walked down the main street, Theodora became acutely aware of curious glances from the townsfolk. A young woman in a dusty blue traveling suit, walking alongside one of the town's cowboys, was evidently cause for interest. "You seem well known here," she observed. "My ranch is just outside town, Vance Creek Ranch, not the biggest spread, but good land, good cattle." His voice carried a hint of pride. "Been building it up for 5 years now." "And no Mrs. Vance to share it with?" The question slipped out before Theodora could stop herself. Thomas chuckled. "No, madam, been too busy building something worth sharing, I suppose." They arrived at a neat two-story house with a wide porch. A plump woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from her rocking chair, eyebrows rising at the sight of them. "Thomas Vance, who's this you're bringing to my doorstep?" Her tone was curious rather than accusatory. "Mrs. Whittaker, this is Miss Theodora Glover. She was meant for Silver Creek but got left here by mistake. I was hoping you might have a room for her until the next coach." Mrs. Whittaker's eyes twinkled as she looked between them. "Of course I do. Though if you ask me, being left in Juniper Springs instead of that rough mining town is Providence smiling on you, dear." "That's exactly what I told her," Thomas said, setting down Theodora's trunk. Mrs. Whittaker stood, smoothing her apron. "Well, come in, Miss Glover. Let's get you settled." "Supper's in an hour." Theodora turned to Thomas. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Vance. My pleasure." He replaced his hat. "I'll check on you tomorrow if that's all right, perhaps show you around town." Before she could formulate a proper refusal, he was back on his horse, tipping his hat to her before riding away. Theodora watched him go, a strange mixture of trepidation and anticipation swirling within her. "He's a good man," Mrs. Whittaker said quietly beside her. "Best in the territory if you ask most folks around here." "I'm promised to another," Theodora replied automatically. Mrs. Whittaker only smiled. "Come along now, that bath water won't heat itself." Later, soaking in a copper tub behind a privacy screen in her rented room, Theodora tried to make sense of her situation. The water soothed her travel-weary muscles, but did nothing to calm her troubled thoughts. She had left Boston after her father's passing left her with mounting debts and few prospects. The advertisement from Harold Hargrove's successful mine owner seeking educated, genteel wife had seemed like divine intervention. Now here she was, stranded in a town she'd never heard of, with a cowboy declaring she was meant for him. It was preposterous. And yet, there had been something in Thomas Vance's steady gaze that made her wonder what kind of life he could offer. "Don't be ridiculous," she murmured to herself, rising from the bath. "You made a commitment." At supper, Theodora met Mrs. Whittaker's other boarders, the schoolteacher, Miss Palmer, and an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as the town's retired doctor. They were kind, curious about the newcomer, but not intrusive. "Thomas Vance is quite the catch," Miss Palmer remarked casually as they cleared the dishes. "Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him, but he's never shown much interest." "I'm not setting my cap for anyone," Theodora insisted. "I'm simply stranded here temporarily." Miss Palmer and Mrs. Whittaker exchanged knowing glances that Theodora pretended not to notice. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed, Theodora tried to imagine the man waiting for her in Silver Creek. Harold Hargrove was 45, he'd written, a respectable age for an established businessman. His letters had been formal, businesslike, outlining what he expected in a wife and what she could expect in return: a comfortable home, financial security, proper standing in the community. Not once had he mentioned anything as frivolous as happiness or love. Those were luxuries Theodora had resigned herself to living without. Practicality was what mattered now. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, it wasn't Harold Hargrove's imagined face that filled her mind, but the sun-bronzed features of Thomas Vance, declaring with inexplicable certainty that she was meant for him. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through lace curtains. Theodora dressed carefully in one of her better dresses, a sage green cotton with subtle embroidery at the collar and cuffs. If she was to be stranded in Juniper Springs, she would at least maintain her standards. At breakfast, Mrs. Whittaker informed her that Thomas had stopped by at dawn, leaving word that he would return at 10 to show her around town. "I never agreed to that," Theodora protested. "Would you rather sit in your room for 2 weeks?" Mrs. Whittaker asked pragmatically. "Besides, knowing the town might be useful if you're forced to stay longer than expected." Theodora couldn't argue with that logic, though she suspected the older woman had ulterior motives for encouraging the outing. At precisely 10 o'clock, a knock came at the door. Thomas stood on the porch, hat in hand, wearing a clean shirt and his best jeans, his dark hair damp and combed neatly. "Good morning, Miss Glover," he greeted her, and Theodora was struck again by the warmth in his blue eyes. "I thought we might start with the telegraph office. You'll probably want to send word to your intended about the delay." The thoughtfulness of this suggestion surprised her. "Yes, that would be sensible, thank you." As they walked, Thomas pointed out the modest establishments that made up Juniper Springs: the general store, the small church, the saloon which he suggested they bypass, the blacksmith shop. People greeted him warmly as they passed, their curious gazes lingering on Theodora. "You must forgive the staring," Thomas said. "We don't get many new faces, especially not ones as—" He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. "As what, Mr. Vance?" Theodora found herself curious about what he'd been about to say. "As refined as yours," he finished, tipping his hat to hide his expression. At the telegraph office, Theodora composed a message to Harold Hargrove, explaining the situation and assuring him she would arrive on the next coach. Thomas waited patiently, making conversation with the telegraph operator. "All done?" he asked when she rejoined him. "Yes, now Mr. Hargrove won't worry when I don't arrive as scheduled." Thomas nodded, though something like disappointment flickered in his eyes. "I was thinking we might have lunch at the hotel restaurant. It's not fancy, but the food's good." The mention of food reminded Theodora that she hadn't eaten since breakfast. That would be lovely. Over a simple meal of chicken stew and fresh bread, Thomas asked about her life in Boston, listening with genuine interest as she spoke of her childhood, her father's business, and the circumstances that had led her to become a mail-order bride. "It can't have been an easy decision," he observed. "Leaving everything familiar to marry a stranger. No easier than building a ranch from nothing in unfamiliar territory," she countered. He smiled at that. "Fair point, but I chose this life because it's what I wanted. It sounds like you didn't have much choice at all." The insight struck uncomfortably close to the truth. "We all make the best decisions we can with the options available to us, Mr. Vance." "Thomas," he corrected gently. "If we're going to be friends during your stay, you might as well use my given name." "Thomas," she repeated, surprising herself by complying. "And you may call me Theodora, I suppose." His smile broadened. "Theodora, it suits you, elegant but with strength behind it." No one had ever described her name that way before, and she found herself absurdly pleased by the observation. After lunch, they continued their tour of the town. It was smaller than Theodora had imagined, but there was a certain charm to its unpretentious buildings and the surrounding landscape of rolling hills and distant mountains. "It's nothing like Boston," she remarked as they paused at the edge of town. "No, it isn't," Thomas agreed, "but it has its own kind of beauty." He wasn't looking at the landscape as he spoke, and Theodora felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "You said your ranch is nearby," she asked, changing the subject. "About 3 miles west. Would you like to see it tomorrow? I could bring a wagon." Propriety dictated she refuse. A respectable woman did not visit a bachelor's home unchaperoned, but curiosity about the ranch and the man who owned it made her hesitate. "Mrs. Whittaker could come along," Thomas added, seemingly reading her thoughts. "She's been after me to bring her some fresh eggs anyway." With that compromise to propriety offered, Theodora found herself agreeing. "I would like that. I've never seen a working ranch before." As they walked back toward the boarding house, a commotion near the saloon caught their attention. A man staggered out, clearly drunk despite the early hour, shouting obscenities. When he spotted Theodora, his bloodshot eyes narrowed. "Well, look here," he slurred, lurching toward them. "New lady in town, prettier than the usual sort." Thomas stepped smoothly in front of Theodora. "Move along, Jenkins, you've had enough for one day," the drunk sneered. "Since when do you give orders, Vance? Just 'cause you got a fancy ranch don't make you better'n me." "No, but being sober does," Thomas replied evenly. "Now step aside before you do something you'll regret." Jenkins spat on the ground near Thomas's boots. "You think you're something special with your fancy Eastern lady. She's probably just another mail-order bride for one of them miners. Used goods, most likely." Before Theodora could register what was happening, Thomas had grabbed Jenkins by the shirt front, lifting him almost off his feet. "Apologize to the lady," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Fear flickered in Jenkins' bloodshot eyes. Sorry, madam," he stammered. "Didn't mean nothin' by it." Thomas released him, and Jenkins stumbled backward, nearly falling. "Get yourself home and sober up," Thomas ordered. As Jenkins slunk away, Thomas turned to Theodora, concern etched on his features. "I'm sorry about that. Jenkins has a problem with the bottle, especially since his wife left him last year." "It's all right," Theodora assured him, though her heart was still racing. She had never seen a man defend her honor so forcefully before. In Boston, conflicts were handled with icy politeness or behind closed doors, not in the middle of the street. "No, it's not all right," Thomas insisted. "You shouldn't have to hear such things." His protectiveness touched her. "Thank you for intervening." They continued walking, the incident casting a shadow over their otherwise pleasant day. When they reached Mrs. Whittaker's, Thomas paused at the gate. "I'll come by around 10 tomorrow with the wagon, if that still suits you," Theodora nodded. "Yes, that would be fine." He studied her face for a moment. "Don't let Jenkins spoil your impression of Juniper Springs. Most folks here are good people." "I won't," she promised. "I've encountered unpleasant individuals in Boston as well. No town has a monopoly on them." Thomas smiled at that. "You're a surprising woman, Theodora Glover." "Is that a compliment, Mr. Vance?" "Thomas," he corrected again. "And yes, it most definitely is." With that, he tipped his hat and departed, leaving Theodora with a strange fluttering in her chest that she firmly attributed to the excitement of the day. Nothing more. That evening, as Theodora sat on the boarding house porch with Mrs. Whittaker, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, the older woman broke their companionable silence. "Thomas tells me you'll be visiting the ranch tomorrow." "Yes, he invited us both." "I hope that's convenient for you," Mrs. Whittaker nodded, her knitting needles clicking steadily. "Oh, I never pass up a chance to visit Vance Creek. It's come along beautifully since he bought that run-down place 5 years ago." "He built it himself?" Theodora asked, her interest piqued. "With his own 2 hands, mostly. Hired help when needed, of course, but Thomas has never been afraid of hard work." She paused her knitting. "Did he tell you how he came to own it?" Theodora shook her head. "He was a cavalry officer during the war, served with distinction from what I hear. After he drifted west like so many young men, looking for a fresh start. Worked as a ranch hand for the Millers over in Cottonwood for 2 years, saving every penny. Then he heard about old man Simmons's place going up for sale after he died with no heirs. And he bought it. Not exactly. The bank owned it by then. Thomas convinced them to sell it to him on terms. Place was falling apart, buildings rotting, fences down, hardly any cattle left. Everyone thought he was crazy." Mrs. Whittaker smiled at the memory, "but he worked that land day and night. Rebuilt everything, established a small herd, planted crops. First year was brutal drought, nearly wiped him out, but he persevered." Theodora found herself captivated by the story. "And now he runs one of the most promising spreads in the county, not the biggest, mind you, but well managed. He's got a good eye for breeding stock, and he treats his hands fair. That ranch will be something special in a few more years." "He must be very proud," Theodora murmured. "He is, but Thomas isn't one to boast. What he needs now is a partner to share it with." Mrs. Whittaker gave her a meaningful look. "Mrs. Whittaker, I know, dear, you're promised to another. I'm just saying that sometimes fate has other plans than the ones we make for ourselves." Theodora chose not to respond, turning her gaze back to the darkening sky. She had never been one to believe in fate. Life was what you made of it through careful decisions and hard work. And yet, Thomas Vance's words from the day before echoed in her mind. "She's meant for me." What would it be like to be the wife of a rancher, she wondered. To build something alongside a man like Thomas, watching it grow year by year. It would certainly be different from the life she had imagined with Harold Hargrove living in a mining town, hosting dinner parties for his business associates, raising children who would eventually be sent east for proper schooling. With a sigh, Theodora pushed such thoughts away. There was no point in wondering about a life she would never have. In less than 2 weeks, she would be on her way to Silver Creek, to the future she had committed herself to. Yet as she prepared for bed that night, Theodora found herself looking forward to tomorrow's visit to Vance Creek Ranch with an anticipation that both excited and alarmed her. The following morning dawned clear and warm. Theodora chose a practical dress of cornflower blue that could withstand a visit to a working ranch. She braided her chestnut hair and pinned it up neatly, then added a straw bonnet with a modest ribbon. Mrs. Whitaker approved her choice. Sensible yet becoming. Thomas will appreciate that you didn't dress like you're afraid to see real work being done. I'm not trying to impress Mr. Vance, Theodora insisted, though she had indeed considered the practicality of her attire more than she might have otherwise. The older woman merely smiled knowingly. Thomas arrived promptly at 10 with a well-maintained wagon pulled by two handsome bay horses. He helped both women up to the bench seat with easy strength, his hand lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary when assisting Theodora. "It's a perfect day for a visit to the ranch," he observed as they set off. "Not too hot, and the wildflowers are putting on quite a show this year." Indeed, the rolling landscape was dotted with vibrant splashes of color purple lupines, golden poppies, and delicate blue forget-me-nots among the green grasses. The mountains rose majestically in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the June warmth. "It's beautiful," Theodora admitted, drinking in the scenery. "Different from the forests of Massachusetts, but beautiful in its own way." "That's what I thought when I first came here," Thomas said. "The openness of it all took some getting used to after the East, but now I can't imagine living anywhere else. There's a freedom in being able to see for miles in every direction." The ride to the ranch took about half an hour, during which Mrs. Whitaker kept up a steady stream of local gossip, with Thomas occasionally adding his own observations. Theodora listened, finding herself smiling at their easy banter and the glimpses it provided into life in Juniper Springs. As they crested a small rise, Thomas pulled the wagon to a halt. "There it is," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "Vance Creek Ranch." Below them stretched a picturesque valley bisected by a meandering creek. A cluster of well-maintained buildings formed the heart of the ranch, a substantial log house with a wide porch, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals. Beyond, green pastures held grazing cattle and fields of young crops stretched toward the hills. It was modest compared to some of the grand estates Theodora had seen, but there was something undeniably appealing about its well-ordered simplicity. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Thomas's smile was like sunrise. "Wait until you see it up close." As they approached, Theodora noticed the details: flower beds bordering the main house, curtains at the windows, a rocking chair on the porch. Someone had taken care to make this more than just a functional working ranch. "My sister visits from Denver every spring," Thomas explained, following her gaze. "She insists that a home needs feminine touches, as she calls them, plants the flowers, sews the curtains, says she's preparing it for when I finally find a wife." "Your sister sounds like a wise woman," Mrs. Whitaker commented. They were greeted by a middle-aged Mexican man who emerged from the barn as the wagon pulled up. "Señor Vance, you return earlier than expected," he called. "Changed my plans, Miguel," Thomas replied. "Ladies, this is Miguel Ramirez, my foreman and the best horseman in 3 territories. Miguel, Mrs. Whitaker you know, and this is Miss Theodora Glover." Miguel removed his hat and bowed slightly. "A pleasure, señorita. We do not often have visitors so beautiful at the ranch." Theodora thanked him for the compliment, noting the obvious respect between the two men. "Miguel has been with me since the beginning," Thomas explained as he helped the women down from the wagon. "Taught me most of what I know about ranching. His wife, Elena, helps in the house when needed." "The boss exaggerates," Miguel said with a grin. "He was a quick learner and stubborn enough to succeed." After showing them the barn, where Theodora admired the fine horses, Thomas led them to the main house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, plain but solid furniture, shelves of books, a few quality rugs on the polished wood floors. "My sister's influence again," Thomas explained as Theodora ran her hand over a well-crafted sideboard. Said if I was going to live like a hermit, I should at least do it in comfort. You're not exactly a hermit, Mrs. Whittaker pointed out. You're in town regular enough. Business usually, Thomas replied, though I try to make it for Sunday services when the cattle allow. Theodora wandered to the bookshelf while the other two discussed someone's new foal. The collection surprised her classics like Shakespeare and Dickens alongside practical manuals on animal husbandry and agriculture, several volumes of poetry, and even some recent novels. "Do you actually read all of these?" she asked when Thomas joined her. "Winter nights are long," he replied with a slight smile. "Not much else to do when snow's piled to the windowsills. I wouldn't have expected." She trailed off, embarrassed, a cowboy to read Shakespeare. His tone was light, but something in his eyes made her regret the implication. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous of me. No offense taken, most folks are surprised. My father was a schoolteacher before he took up farming. Education was important to him." A shadow crossed his face. "He and my mother died of influenza when I was 16, but by then he'd already instilled the habit of reading." "I'm sorry for your loss," Theodora said softly, understanding now why he'd built this place from nothing. Like her, he had been left to make his own way in the world. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. Mrs. Whittaker cleared her throat. "Thomas, why don't you show Theodora the rest of the ranch while I gather some eggs for my basket?" "Elena said the hens have been laying well." Thomas seemed to collect himself. "Of course. Would you like to see the creek, Theodora? It's quite pretty this time of year." They walked together down a well-worn path, the sound of running water growing louder as they approached the creek that gave the ranch its name. It was indeed lovely clear water burbling over smooth stones, shaded by cottonwood trees whose leaves whispered in the gentle breeze. "I come here to think sometimes," Thomas said as they stood on the bank. "There's something soothing about moving water. We had a small stream near our house in the country when I was a child," Theodora recalled, "before my father's business required us to move to the city. I used to spend hours watching the water, imagining where it might eventually flow to." "And where did you imagine it going?" "To grand adventures, of course, places I'd read about in books but never thought I'd see." She smiled at the memory. "I was a rather fanciful child. And the woman?" Thomas asked, his gaze steady on her face. "Does she still dream of adventures?" Theodora looked away, watching the play of sunlight on water. "The woman learned that practicality serves better than fancy in the real world." "Maybe," Thomas said thoughtfully. "Or maybe the right adventures are practical too, in their own way." Before she could ask what he meant, a shout came from the direction of the ranch. They turned to see Miguel waving to them. "Rider coming in," he called. Thomas frowned. "We're not expecting anyone today." They walked back quickly, arriving at the main yard just as a dust-covered rider pulled up. The man nodded to Thomas. "Vance, got a telegram for you from Silver Creek." He handed over a yellow paper. "Figured it might be important coming from outside the territory." Thomas thanked him, offering water for his horse before he continued on to town. Then he opened the telegram, his expression growing serious as he read. "Is something wrong?" Theodora asked. He hesitated before holding out the paper. "It's addressed to both of us, actually." Puzzled, Theodora took the telegram and read too. "Thomas Vance and Theodora Glover, Juniper Springs from Harold Hargrove. Silver Creek message. Marriage arrangement canceled. Stop. Found suitable wife here. Stop. No need to continue journey. Stop. Wish you well. Stop." Theodora read it twice, unable to quite process the words. Harold Hargrove had found someone else. The contract was void. The journey, the planning, the upheaval of her life, all for nothing. "Theodora," Thomas's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you all right?" She blinked, focusing on his concerned face. I don't know." Mrs. Whittaker appeared at her elbow. "What's happened?" Thomas explained quietly while Theodora continued to stare at the telegram. She should feel devastated, she thought, abandoned, desperate even. Instead, what she primarily felt was relief. The realization startled her so much that she laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that made both Thomas and Mrs. Whittaker look at her with concern. "I'm sorry," she said, composing herself. "It's just, I've come all this way, left everything behind, and now I have nowhere to go." "That's not true," Thomas said firmly. "You have options, Theodora." "What options? I can't afford passage back to Boston, and even if I could, there's nothing for me there." "You could stay here," Mrs. Whittaker suggested. "Juniper Springs could use a woman of your education." "Miss Palmer has been talking about returning east to care for her mother. The school board will need a new teacher by fall." "Or," Thomas began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider. "Or what?" Theodora prompted. He took a deep breath. "Or you could consider a different proposal." "Thomas," Mrs. Whittaker cautioned, "perhaps this isn't the moment." But Thomas's eyes never left Theodora's face. "When I saw you standing alone by that stagecoach, something told me you were meant to be here. Not in Silver Creek with Hargrove, but here. I know it sounds crazy, we've only just met, but I've learned to trust my instincts." "What are you saying?" Theodora asked, though she thought she knew. "I'm saying that my offer stands, the one I made when we first met. I think you're meant for me, Theodora Glover. And I think, if you're honest with yourself, you might feel the same possibility I do." Theodora's heart pounded in her chest. This was madness. One didn't simply transfer affections from one prospective husband to another like changing dance partners at a ball. And yet, hadn't she already been feeling drawn to this man, despite her best efforts to remain committed to her original plan? "This is very sudden," she managed. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer," Thomas clarified. "Just for you to consider staying, getting to know me better, seeing if what I feel might be right for both of us." Mrs. Whittaker cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should head back to town. Theodora needs time to think, and we're imposing on your hospitality, Thomas." "You're never an imposition," he assured her, but nodded in agreement. "But you're right that Theodora needs time to consider her options." He turned back to Theodora. "All I ask is that you don't dismiss the possibility out of hand." The ride back to town was quieter than the journey out. Mrs. Whittaker made a few attempts at conversation, but soon lapsed into silence, seemingly understanding Theodora's need to process the day's unexpected developments. Thomas respected her thoughtful mood as well, focusing on guiding the wagon rather than pressing his case further. Once, when their eyes met briefly, Theodora saw not expectation but patience in his gaze, and that perhaps impressed her more than any words could have. At the boarding house, Thomas helped them down, his hand steadying and warm against Theodora's. "Thank you for today," she said, finding her voice at last. "Your ranch is lovely. You've built something to be proud of." "Thank you," he replied simply. "Will I see you tomorrow?" Theodora hesitated. I need some time, Thomas," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk." As she watched him drive away, Mrs. Whittaker placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Come inside, dear. I'll make us some tea and you can sort through your thoughts." Over steaming cups at the kitchen table, Mrs. Whittaker waited patiently while Theodora gathered her thoughts. "I don't know what to do," she finally admitted. "Everything has happened so quickly. A week ago, I was in Boston preparing to marry a man I'd never met. Now I'm stranded in a town I never intended to visit, with another man I barely know declaring I'm meant for him. Life rarely follows the paths we lay out for ourselves," Mrs. Whittaker observed. "The question is, what do you want, Theodora? Not what you planned or what's practical, but what your heart tells you." "I hardly know." "Well, let's consider your options plainly. You could try to find passage back east, though as you said, there's little waiting for you there. You could look for a position here as the schoolteacher, as I suggested. You could continue to Silver Creek and see if there are opportunities there, though I wouldn't recommend a mining town for a woman alone. Or," she paused meaningfully, "or I could consider Thomas's proposal," Theodora finished for her. "Which isn't really a proposal yet, is it? More an invitation to consider possibilities." Theodora nodded slowly. "That's true, he's not asking for an immediate commitment. Thomas Vance isn't a man who makes decisions lightly, nor one who says things he doesn't mean," Mrs. Whittaker said. "If he believes there's something special between you, it's because he truly feels it, not because he's swept up in romantic notions. But how can he know after just 2 days?" Mrs. Whittaker smiled. Some people know their minds and hearts quickly, others need more time. There's no shame in being the latter, dear. What would you do? Theodora asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. The older woman considered this. If I were 20 years younger and had caught the eye of a man like Thomas, I'd give it a proper chance. Life offers few enough opportunities for happiness. Only a fool turns away without at least looking closely at what's being offered. That night, Theodora lay awake long after the household had quieted, her thoughts churning. The telegram from Harold Hargrove sat on her bedside table, its message somehow liberating despite the rejection it represented. She had never met Hargrove, had formed no emotional attachment beyond the practical recognition that he offered security. His breaking of their arrangement left her free to consider other options without the burden of a broken promise. And Thomas. In just 2 days, he had shown himself to be kind, intelligent, hardworking, and honorable. The connection she felt with him was unlike anything she had experienced before. Was that enough to build a life upon? She's meant for me, he had said with such certainty. What would it be like to be wanted so definitely, not just for what she could provide as a wife, but for herself as dawn broke? Theodora made her decision. She would stay in Juniper Springs, at least for now. She would explore the possibility that Thomas Vance saw so clearly. Not with a promise of marriage, not yet, but with an open heart and mind. After breakfast, she walked to the general store where she purchased stationery and sent a brief reply to Harold Hargrove, acknowledging his telegram and wishing him well. The formality of the act provided closure to that chapter of her life. Next, she visited the mayor's office, inquiring about the potential teaching position Mrs. Whittaker had mentioned. The mayor seemed delighted at the prospect of an educated Easterner taking over the school, explaining that Miss Palmer had indeed given notice just the previous week. The term starts in September, he explained. Would give you the summer to settle in, get to know the children and their families. I haven't made a definite decision to stay, Theodora cautioned. The mayor smiled knowingly. Word travels fast in a small town, Miss Glover. I hear Thomas Vance might have some interest in persuading you. Heat rose in Theodora's cheeks. News apparently travels faster than facts, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Vance and I are merely acquaintances. Of course, he said, not looking convinced. Well, the position is open if you want it. Board meets next Tuesday if you'd like to make your case formally. As Theodora left the mayor's office, she spotted Thomas coming out of the mercantile across the street. He saw her at the same moment, his face brightening. They met in the middle of the dusty road. Good morning, he greeted her, hat already in hand. I was going to call on you later. I've been arranging some matters, she explained, suddenly nervous now that the moment was at hand. Important matters? Yes, I replied to Mr. Hargrove's telegram, and I spoke with the mayor about the teaching position. Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, hope, she thought. Does that mean you're considering staying in Juniper Springs? I am, she confirmed. It seems the most practical option available to me at present. Practical, he repeated, a slight smile playing at his lips. And is that the only reason? Theodora took a deep breath. No. Not the only reason, his smile broadened. Would you walk with me? There's a little park at the edge of town, not much, but the benches are comfortable. They strolled together, drawing curious glances from townsfolk that Theodora pretended not to notice. The park turned out to be a small grove of trees with 2 wooden benches and a simple fountain. The ladies' auxiliary raised funds for this last year, Thomas explained as they sat. Thought the town needed a proper place for contemplation. It's charming, Theodora said, and meant it. The sound of the fountain and the shade of the trees created a peaceful atmosphere. They sat in silence for a moment before Thomas spoke. I meant what I said yesterday, Theodora, but I understand if you need time. I do need time, she agreed. This is all very sudden, and I'm not one to make impulsive decisions. I respect that, and I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. He turned slightly to face her more directly. But I would like to court you properly if you're amenable, no commitments yet, just getting to know each other. The earnestness in his expression touched her deeply. I think I would like that, she said softly, The smile that illuminated his face was worth any uncertainty she felt. "You've made me a very happy man today, Theodora Glover." "I've agreed to nothing more than courtship," she reminded him, though she couldn't help returning his smile. "For now, that's more than enough." As summer unfurled across the Wyoming territory, Theodora found herself settling into life in Juniper Springs with surprising ease. The teaching position was officially offered and accepted, giving her a purpose and place in the community. Mrs. Whitaker insisted she stay at the boarding house, waving away concerns about payment until Theodora's first teaching salary came through. "Consider it an investment in the town's future," the older woman said firmly. "Besides, it's nice having someone young around the place." Thomas courted her with a consideration that both charmed and surprised her. There were buggy rides on Sunday afternoons, picnics by the creek, and evenings on Mrs. Whitaker's porch sharing books and conversation. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, content to let their relationship develop naturally. Theodora found herself looking forward to their time together, her initial reservations gradually giving way to genuine affection. Thomas was unlike any man she had known in Boston, straightforward, where they had been circumspect, genuine, where they had been calculating. His passion for the land, for building something meaningful, resonated with her own buried desires for a life of purpose. July brought scorching heat, and the town's Independence Day celebration. Theodora found herself in the middle of the preparations, helping to organize games for the children and contributing to the communal feast planned for the town square. "You've become quite the local already," Thomas observed as they hung bunting from the bandstand the day before the celebration. "Mrs. Whitaker says half the town has been by to meet the new schoolteacher. People have been very welcoming," Theodora agreed. "It's different from Boston. There, it would take years to be accepted into established social circles. And here, bringing a decent apple pie to the church social seems to do the trick." She smiled, remembering Mrs. Whitaker's coaching through her first attempt at Western-style baking. Thomas laughed. Food is the universal language of acceptance in these parts. As they worked, Theodora found herself studying him when he wasn't looking the strong line of his jaw, the way the summer sun had deepened the tan on his forearms, the gentle way he handled the fragile decorations. In just a month, he had become essential to her happiness in a way she hadn't thought possible. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. The fourth dawned bright and clear. Theodora wore her best dress, a white eyelet with a blue sash that felt appropriately patriotic, and joined the festivities with enthusiasm. There were races for the children, a shooting contest for the men, which Thomas won handily, and enough food to feed 3 times the town's population. As twilight fell, couples began to gather for dancing in the town square. A small band struck up a lively tune, and Thomas appeared at Theodora's side, hand extended. "May I have this dance, Miss Glover?" "I'm not familiar with these dances," she admitted, eyeing the energetic movements of the other couples. "I'll teach you," he promised. "It's not so different from your Eastern dances, just a bit more enthusiastic." Laughing, she let him lead her into the set. The steps were indeed similar enough to the reels she knew, though performed with less restraint than would have been acceptable in Boston society. Thomas was a surprisingly good dancer, guiding her confidently through the patterns. As the music slowed for a waltz, he drew her closer, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. "You're a natural," he murmured. "I had an excellent teacher," she replied, aware of the warmth of his hand through the fabric of her dress. They moved together as if they had danced 100 times before, their steps perfectly matched. Around them, the town square faded away until it seemed they were alone under the star-filled Wyoming sky. "Theodora," Thomas said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know it's only been a month, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Her heart quickened. "Thomas, no, please let me finish. I don't expect an answer today, but I want you to know that my feelings haven't changed since the day I first saw you. If anything, they've only grown stronger." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Theodora Glover, and whenever you're ready, I would be honored to make you my wife." The music continued around them, but they had stopped dancing, standing still amidst the swirling couples. Theodora looked up into Thomas's earnest face and knew, with sudden clarity, that she had found what she hadn't even known she was seeking. "I love you too," she whispered, the words coming easily, naturally. "I think perhaps I have since that first day when you declared so confidently that I was meant for you." Joy blazed across his features. "Does that mean, it means I accept your proposal, Thomas Vance. I would be honored to be your wife." He looked for a moment as if he might sweep her off her feet right there in the middle of the dance, but instead he bent his head and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded in kind. A cheer went up around them, breaking the spell. They separated to find the entire town watching, broad smiles on every face. "Looks like Juniper Springs is getting a new schoolteacher and a wedding," someone called, to general laughter and applause. Theodora blushed but didn't pull away when Thomas put his arm around her waist, drawing her close to his side. "Is it too soon?" he asked quietly, for her ears alone. "We can wait if you prefer," she shook her head. "No, when something is right, there's no reason to wait." "And this feels right, Thomas, more right than anything has ever felt before." The wedding took place in late August, before the school term began and while the weather was still fine enough for an outdoor celebration. The entire town turned out, the women contributing food and decorations, the men setting up tables and benches in the town square. Theodora wore a new dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Whittaker had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a formal veil. Thomas, resplendent in a new black suit, waited for her before the church steps, his face alight with joy as she walked toward him on the arm of the mayor, who had offered to give her away. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and certain as they promised to love, honor, and cherish each other for all their days. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Thomas's kiss held all the promise of the life they would build together. The celebration lasted well into the night, with dancing and feasting under lantern light. As the stars came out, Thomas led his bride away from the revelry, helping her into the waiting buggy decorated with ribbons and flowers by the town's children. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Vance?" he asked, his voice tender in the darkness. Theodora smiled, the new name feeling right, like a dress made specifically for her. "Yes, Mr. Vance, take me home." The journey to the ranch passed in comfortable silence, Thomas's arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. As they approached, Theodora saw lights in the windows of the main house. Elena and Miguel had gone ahead to prepare for their arrival, but it was what stood before the house that took her breath away. A large wooden arch, festooned with flowers and lanterns, spanned the entrance to the yard. Across its top, freshly painted letters spelled out Vance Creek Ranch. "Thomas, it's beautiful," she breathed. "A wedding gift," he explained, helping her down from the buggy. "I wanted you to feel that this is truly your home now, not just mine that you're joining." Inside, Theodora found more surprises. The main room had been transformed with new curtains that matched the ones she had admired in a catalog, a comfortable rocking chair by the fireplace, and bookshelves rearranged to include the volumes she had brought from Boston. "When did you do all this?" she asked, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gestures. "Been working on it bit by bit over the summer. Miguel and Elena helped, and my sister sent some things from Denver." He looked almost shy. "I wanted it to feel like our home, not just mine that you're moving into." "It's perfect," she assured him, overwhelmed by the love evident in every detail. Later, as they lay together in the large bed that was now theirs, Theodora marveled at the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. A stagecoach error, a broken contract, a chance meeting with a man who had taken one look at her and declared with absolute certainty that she was meant for him. "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked, his finger tracing the smile on her lips. "I'm thinking that sometimes the wrong town turns out to be exactly the right place," she answered, turning to face him. "And that sometimes a man who says she's meant for me knows exactly what he's talking about." Thomas smiled, drawing her closer. I knew at the moment I saw you standing there, looking so lost and so determined all at once. Some things a man just knows in his soul. I'm glad you were so certain, Theodora murmured against his chest. It gave me time to discover what you already knew. And now. She raised her head to look into his eyes, seeing there all the love and promise that had drawn her to him from the beginning. Now I know with absolute certainty that this is where I belong, with you, building this life together. That's all I've ever wanted, Thomas whispered, his lips finding hers in the darkness. 5 years later, Theodora stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Thomas showed their 3-year-old son, James, how to sit properly on his first pony. Their infant daughter, Elizabeth, slept peacefully in her arms, oblivious to her brother's excited shouts. Vance Creek Ranch had prospered beyond even Thomas's ambitious dreams. The herd had tripled in size, the crops yielded abundantly, and they had added several new buildings to accommodate the growing operation. Theodora had continued teaching until James was born, and now divided her time between her family and occasional substitute teaching when needed. The town of Juniper Springs had grown as well, with new families settling and businesses opening. Much of the credit, people said, was due to the example set by the Vance family, hardworking, forward-thinking, and committed to building something that would last for generations. "Mama, look." James called, sitting proudly astride the gentle pony while Thomas held the lead rope. "I'm a cowboy like Papa, I see, darling," Theodora called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Thomas glanced up at her, his smile still capable of making her heart skip a beat after all these years. The sun had weathered his face somewhat, and there were a few strands of silver at his temples now, but his eyes held the same warmth and love they had the day he'd declared she was meant for him. As if reading her thoughts, he winked at her before turning his attention back to their son. Later that evening, with the children asleep and the day's work done, Thomas and Theodora sat together on the porch swing he had built for their first anniversary. The stars spread across the Wyoming sky like diamonds scattered on velvet, the only sound the distant lowing of cattle and the gentle creak of the swing. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Theodora asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "If the stagecoach hadn't left me in the wrong town," Thomas considered this, his arm tightening around her. "Sometimes, you'd be in Silver Creek, married to a mine owner, probably hosting fancy dinner parties and wondering why you felt something was missing. And you? I'd be here working the ranch, telling myself I was content with my books and my cattle." He turned to kiss her temple, "But I'd have known something was missing too, someone was missing. It's strange to think that all our happiness hinged on a stagecoach driver's mistake," Theodora mused. Thomas shook his head. "Not a mistake, Providence. You were always meant to be here, Theodora, with me, with our children, building this life together." Looking out at the ranch they had built, the home they had made, the family they had created, Theodora knew he was right. Some things transcended logic or planning. Some things were simply meant to be. "She's meant for me," Thomas had said that day, so long ago now, and every day since had proven just how right he had been.